the commencement of a debate on the general principle of the bill for an act to establish the National Institute for Electoral Studies to serve as a high-level intellectual center for academic and professional research training on election management, electoral standards, and electoral studies to facilitate effective democratic governance in Nigeria, and for the related matters thereto. Extending the name of Honorable Onofiok Luke. Honorable members will recall that the bill was read the first time on Wednesday, 24th July 2019. I now invite Honorable Onofiok to move that the bill be read a second time.
State. Mr. Speaker, I hereby move a motion for the second reading of the bill for an act to establish the National Institute for Electoral Studies and to serve as a high-level intellectual center for academic and professional research and training on election management, electoral standards, and electoral studies to facilitate effective democratic governance in Nigeria and for related matters. I so move, sir. Once again, Hon Onofiok Luke, by the grace of God, I speak for the people of Etinan, Nsurubium Federal Constituency. I'm from Akwa Ibom State.
Honorable Luke, you represent the people of your constituency, but you speak for the people of Nigeria. Don't limit yourself.
Thank you very much, my speaker. And like I promised you from the one that I'm your student in this chamber, being a first timer, I would continue to learn, sir. Mr. Speaker, we will recall your inaugural speech that you made mention of reforms that you would initiate as the leader and as the speaker of this legislature. You did not only stop at that, Mr. Speaker. You gave expression to those commitments of yours when you unveiled the legislative agenda of the 9th National Assembly, specifically the House of Representatives. And finding conspicuous expression in the legislative agenda is electoral reforms in this country. And Mr. Speaker, it's on the basis of your speech and the basis of your leadership, which reflects the yearnings and aspirations of Nigerians, that I have come before you with these proposals, seeking to establish the National Institute for Electoral Studies to serve as a high-level intellectual center for academic and professional research, and training on election management, electoral standards, and electoral studies. Mr. Speaker, we have had a series of elections since the Fourth Republic, and there are certain occurrences that keep happening in these elections that we have had that does not augur well with Nigerians and does not augur well with Nigeria. And we keep repeating these mistakes, Mr. Speaker. Now the question is, would we have loved to continue to repeat these mistakes? The answer, I believe, the election manager would say no, because probably they don't have the institutional framework which will serve as a basis for them to reflect upon or to study the previous elections on how to look at the pitfalls, look at the challenges of the previous elections, and then seek to improve on what has happened before. So, Mr. Speaker, it's on the basis of this that this bill seeks to establish a research institute to serve as a basis for studies for election managers and election management in this country. And this is in line with the clamor of Nigerians for electoral reforms, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, permit me to rely on Order 9, Rule 1, Sub 1, to be able to make some submissions based on the reading of some provisions that I have in this lead argument, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the objective of the bill is that it seeks to establish the National Institute for Electoral Studies, which will serve as a high-level intellectual center for academic and professional research and training on election management, electoral standards, and electoral studies to facilitate effective democratic governance in Nigeria and for other related matters. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the bill seeks to provide continuing education for all categories of electoral officers by undertaking, organizing, conducting, and facilitating study courses, lectures, seminars, workshops, conferences, and other programs related to electoral management and education. It also seeks to ensure the smooth and proper planning, execution, and conduct of elections in Nigeria. It also seeks to deepen free and fair election, responsible leadership, good governance, and democracy in Nigeria. And finally, the bill seeks to operate as an intellectual service center for the Independent National Electoral Commission, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in summary, the bill consists of 17 sections and a schedule. Section 1 of the bill establishes the National Institute for Electoral Studies as an institution and body corporate with the capacity to sue and be sued. Section 2 creates the governing council of the institute and its membership, which shall be responsible for the management of the affairs of the institute. The institute is to carry out its functions in an objective, non-partisan manner, independently of any body or group. Section 3 states the objectives and functions of the institute, while Section 4 and 5 provide for the structure and the management committee for the institute respectively, Mr. Speaker, which will aid in the efficient running of the institute. And Section 7 made service in the institute pensionable for security and welfare of its staff upon retirement. And Section 8 establishes funds so that the institute can derive funds from different sources and effectively discharge its functions. The bill also makes provision for estimate, account, and audit, notice of intention to sue, annual report, etc. Mr. Speaker, on the 2nd day of April 2011, INEC postponed election when voting had already commenced in some parts of the country. Reason: suspended due to the late arrival of result sheets in many parts of the country. The election were postponed by 2 days and held on April 4th. Mr. Speaker, on the 14th day of February 2015, elections were postponed for 6 weeks, from the initial February 14th, 2015, to March 28, 2015, owing to security reasons. INEC stated, though, that they were ready to conduct the elections. Mr. Speaker, we thought that this would not repeat itself again. But on Saturday, the 16th day of February 2019, INEC announced in the early hours of Saturday that proceedings with the elections was no longer feasible after a careful review of the implementation of its logistics and operational plan. Mr. Speaker, if we had an institute that undertook research on these challenges, we believe that we would have not had the repeat of this postponement of election serially, as we have had, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, the situation where ad hoc staff are recruited maybe 2 weeks to the elections has worked hardship on candidates. Mr. Speaker, most of the situations where elections are annulled by court because of the mutilation of result sheet are not most times out of fraudulent practices, but are most times because of the lack of knowledge for the ad hoc officials that are recruited, that they don't know where to fill the figures where they ought to, because they did not have adequate and appropriate training that the office they occupy or the job they seek to do demands. So it's on the basis of this, Mr. Speaker, that we are proposing this institute that will serve as a training ground for both those ad hoc staff and then the staff in the employ of INEC. And not only for the federal elections, but even for the state elections, and not only for Nigeria, will serve as a training ground for other persons across the West African country or Africa that will want to use the institute as a basis of training for their people and their staff in the areas of election management. Mr. Speaker, finally, there might be concerns, Mr. Speaker, raised. This bill seeks to resolve those concerns, Mr. Speaker. Number one is there is a concern that there's an institute warehoused in INEC, the Electoral Institute, Mr. Speaker. The National Institute for Electoral Studies will serve as a permanent structure and a place and will be a broader platform for training of electoral officers, staff, both support or ad hoc, civil societies, security agencies, and any other body involved in conduct of elections, both at the state and national level. Whereas Electoral Institute, as we have now in Independent National Electoral Commission has no permanent structure and it is operated on an ad hoc basis, does not have a strong legal backing for its existence. Training of officials is done occasionally, and the training is limited and does not cover all categories of officials involved in the planning, execution, and conduct of elections, both at the national and at the state level. Training by the National Institute that we are proposing to be established by this Act will be all-encompassing, Mr. Speaker. The Institute will be separate from the Independent National Electoral Commission, though will be a full permanent service center for INEC, whereas Electoral Institute operates temporarily and is an organ or appendage of INEC with limited scope. Besides INEC, sir, the National Institute will also service institutions and persons interested in conduct of free, fair, and proper elections, both in and outside Nigeria, a role that the Electoral Institute cannot perform given its limited mandate. Mr. Speaker, another concern is there is the Institute of Electoral, the Proposition of Electoral Studies and the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, Mr. Speaker. Election management and legislature are different, Mr. Speaker. Hence, the need to keep them apart. While NILS service the legislature, and we commend them for the work that they've done in the legislature, and we don't want them to be distracted because they provide us the basis upon which we build our research and our legislative work and our legislative brief. We don't want them to be distracted with other engagement. The National Institute of Electoral Studies will service INEC in particular, and electoral managers, planners, civil societies, and election monitors in Nigeria. Mr. Speaker, NILS offers professional courses in election management, but how many people have the finances to be able to afford to do that as postgraduate level as we have today? And how many of INEC staff or election managers can we afford to send on postgraduate studies? This is the reason why we need an institute that is tailored towards the training of election managers, where it can be open to all. So, Mr. Speaker, the hands of NILS are already filled with legislative activities of the National Assembly and the state and the local government legislatures, and the training of legislators and legislative staff all over the country and Africa. Hence, should not be overburdened with electoral issues. Mr. Speaker, finally, honorable colleagues, the bill, when passed, will cure the mischief of election postponement and mismanagement in Nigeria, quicken our pace to a free and fair election, and will ultimately strengthen Nigeria's democracy. I respectfully urge you all to please support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity once again.
Say aye. Those against, please say nay. The ayes have it. The clerk is invited to read the long title of the bill.
National Institute for Electoral Studies to serve as a high-level intellectual center for academic and professional research, training on election management, electoral standards, and election studies to facilitate effective democratic governance in Nigeria and for related matters. Second reading.